Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We might get going now. My name's Stuart Finn from the University of Queensland. I'm also involved with Earth Observation Australia, which is a group that coordinates people who collect and develop products and services from Earth observation imagery. And I'm also associated with SmartSat Cooperative Research Centre. I'll be co-chairing this afternoon's session, and our other presenter today is Professor Andrew Robson from the University of New England, who directs the Applied Agricultural Remote Sensing Centre. So before we start today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and water bodies on which we meet and which we work, and acknowledge and pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and also recognise their current and emerging leaders, and acknowledge the work that they have done in contributing to the understanding of and managing of our environments, and also note that we are working with them on trying to move forward in this area. Just a few points of housekeeping before we get going today. So as I mentioned before, if you could just keep your microphones on mute and your cameras off until we get to the discussion session. If you do have any technical challenges with the audio or video feed that's coming through, please type it into the chat window and we will try and address things on our end as best we can. We are recording everything today, so what you see in the slide window, any audio or visuals, any text in the chat window, including private chats, is recorded. We will make a copy of that available to everybody after the workshop, along with other materials which we'll talk about later today in terms of progressing the development of this collective activity. So before I move into our other sections, I do want to acknowledge Georgia Perlman from University of New England and Larissa Marfan from University of Queensland for getting all of this set up and running properly for us. So just in terms of today, there's the agenda of what we're going to get through. It is relatively short and focused, and you can see a large chunk of it is around discussion. This is the third workshop in a small series that we've started, and today is about how we link together the people that produce these crop classification products and services with those using them, and work together nationally more effectively. So once I finish giving some background, Andrew's going to talk a bit more about what we've covered previously, clarify some key terms that people have brought up so that we're all on the same page. We'll have a very short break and then go into an open discussion dealing with a proposed approach to go forward. And I think Andrew and I will be at pains to express multiple times during what we go through today that this is draft. It's by no means set in stone. It's a starting point, and we need everybody's input to let us know it's on the right track, the wrong track, this is where we should be going, those sorts of things. About 20 past the next hour, we'll then have a wrap up and outline what the next steps are in this process. So as I said, this is the third session in our sort of how do we develop a national crop mapping coordinated capability, acknowledging that a lot of groups are already doing this. A lot of people are doing research, whether it's in universities, private industry and government, to pull this together. So it's like, how do we actually work together? On Wednesday, we looked at, what are our current capabilities and challenges, and would cooperation be helpful? And we collected a lot of information there. Yesterday was very industry focused, and it was about crop classification products and how they were actually being used. And again, we conducted a survey, and we do want to acknowledge everybody who provided input to those. And today is to go, right, we've got a sense of what's going on in this space. Obviously, we're not covering everybody, but we at least know roughly what's going on. How can we go forward to make sure we can all do the work that we need to do in government, in different scales of industry, and also in sort of universities and research institutions as well. So just before I let Andrew come and introduce the key part of today, just to reiterate the aims of what we were doing in this workshop session, it was to build an understanding of how people are going about crop mapping or crop classification and look at that at a range of different scales. And it was to initiate some coordination activities across all of those different areas with the aim of working out how do we do things better to help each of us deliver what's required. So there is a process that we're going through here. We're trying to draw together the different groups. This is a consultation phase, and what we will establish coming out of this are going to be some draft recommendations for going forward, which will look like how do we actually develop and run this crop classification capability. The text in that box is, again, it's just draft, it's proposed, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So just in terms of, this is what we've covered, so probably don't need to go into it in detail. There's 3 workshops, but then on the far right side there, you can see where we're going. So from these 3 workshops, we're going to come up with an outline of this is what this capability might actually look like, and agree on how we could potentially work together to do that. And we recognise it'll be at all different stages for people to engage or not. The next step is how do we build this collective to build the capability and moving forwards, and also engage potentially with one of the relevant government groups that's delivering collaborative land use mapping projects already. All right, last slide from me. These are the key points from yesterday, which we will address. So for those of you that weren't here yesterday, and these were concerns from industry as well as government, and also people doing research in those areas. Trust between the producers and users of information, and privacy concerns about what information is communicated at different levels. Being able to communicate the accuracy and validity of products, making sure people are able to choose products that are fit for use, and whatever we establish here, making sure there's appropriate and workable governance, that it's not overly bureaucratic, and that we have funding processes in place for it. Okay, over to Andrew.
Thanks, Stuart, and thank you again for everyone turning up on a Friday afternoon, and those that have backed up for the 3rd workshop in a row, and giving us your time to contribute to this. There was a couple of terms. We had some feedback following the session yesterday where us in the crop classification scope take for granted that a lot of the stuff we're talking about is well known and well understood. And so there was a really good suggestion from Jane Stewart that it was probably worth just providing a slide on each of these points here to clarify a lot of that discussion that was happening yesterday. So for those that do this all the time, please bear with me. But if there's industry partners who haven't really been exposed before, this provides some background. We're playing mouse duels, I think. Stuart, your mouse is going too. So the first one was getting the accuracies right in crop boundary delineation. Now this is an important factor. So this is delineating the actual outsides of a crop. So it's not saying where it is, but just the extent of it. And we've just got some examples of sort of the accuracies that's involved with that, and sort of the errors of omission and commission. And what that means is, say on the left-hand side one, we have a nice block of, what we say is a crop. But when you actually refine it, there's areas, say, of new plant that, say here, compared to here, that haven't been included. Similarly, there's areas that have been included in this one that shouldn't be. Such as, I've got 2 mouses running this joint. Can you see my mouse at all? No? You're on mute. Sorry, everyone. Technical issue. No, all right, ignore that. If you can't see my mouse, then Stuart, please be the mouse driver.
Yeah, so emission errors first.
Yeah, okay, emission errors. Particularly a lot of cropping systems that are changing all the time. So things like vegetable crops that are being planted multiple times through the year, tree crops at the moment that we're seeing are being planted, or extension of planting happening every year, is that the classification may not, oh, there we are, someone can see my mouse. I can see your mouse, Robbo, there. Thanks, Jim. So yes, there's areas that are missed. So that's really important. The second bit is that we include areas in the classification, or in the boundary, I should say, that aren't crop specific. And the problems with that, if you end up with large areas that are included, that aren't crop, that will blow out the areas, and it'll also affect the classification of crop type subsequent to that. So that's the first one that was discussed yesterday, was boundary. The second one, if Stuart, you want to, thank you. Now, I've used an example from a non-Australian provider, and there's reasons why I've done that, and I'll explain a little bit in a minute. But classification of crop type. So within those boundaries, what is the crop that's occurring there? There's a number of approaches that we discussed over the last few days, and that's the satellite imagery based approach, and a lot of the subsequent classification techniques that are used. Excuse me. And a byproduct of that is you do end up with crops with holes in it. You similarly can end up with parts of crops appearing in different areas with wrong classifications. And you can end up, of course, with really good answers as well. This is obviously important for the classification of crop type within those different polygons. And if you get it wrong, obviously it makes mistakes, but it reiterates the need for the multiple approaches. So the satellite image analysis approach, the ground truthing, the industry engagement to help support it. Okay, we like our scale there. We've used Esri language there just for those map heads out there. So,
it is what 1 kilometre.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Stuart. So if we go on to the next slide. So what it ends up coming together is, and again, I've used an overseas example because we've been very, very clear to make our presentation and this workshop's non-biased and non-pushed to any direction from Australian providers. We've tried very hard to represent everyone that's working in this space. So that's firstly why we've used this example from One Soil, which is a group out of Minsk who are working globally to map crop type. The point of this slide is the crop classification. And as you can see, this is what we're talking about for those that aren't aware. It's identifying the boundaries and the crop type of all crop types in Australia as a base layer to be updated at least every year and hopefully achieve a good accuracy. I think that gives you a bit of an overview. As you can see, it looks pretty impressive doing whole countries, so down to the paddock level. Next one, please, Stuart. They are currently, so the reason again why I chose this example is One Soil Group are currently developing the map over Australia at the moment. So with their analysis, they're providing 4 years of data. They're covering 59 countries, 1 million users, and some obscene amount of crops. Why I wanted to show this is, look, there's good and bads with everything, but why I wanted to show it is to demonstrate that it's happening around the world, that there's national companies that are mapping crop types across whole countries. It demonstrates, yeah, that's the point I just said then, and that's right down from the national to the paddock level. It also demonstrates that we have the opportunity within this group to do this, and if we work together, we can actually achieve. We can address some of the errors associated with a mapping layer such as this, because at the moment this is predominantly developed from a machine learning approach from Sentinel imagery. They are working very hard to get ground truthing information from Australia to update it, but it is very much limited by that at the moment. And this is not saying they may or may not be involved in the future. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the group that's been involved in this discussion for Australia, we can do this a lot better, and it is possible. The other thing, if we do it with ourselves, so to speak, we have it's an Australian-owned product, and it benefits us as a community, and it benefits Australia. We have better data control, we have better ability to integrate it with other systems, and the value add on top of that, the benefits to Australia, again, are huge. So please consider that, that this is being done by big global companies. So we can't hide in the sand and pretend it's not, but we can work together to at least do it better. And I think that's, Stuart, I think that's, oh no, sorry, one more. Right, the other one that came up quite a lot was the mention of ACLUMP. And again, those in the mapping trade are very aware of what ACLUMP and the great work they do. But we thought it was worthwhile spending just a couple of minutes getting Dr. Jane Stewart to actually explain a bit more about ACLUMP for those people out there in the virtual world who aren't aware. So if Jane, are you available now?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I'll mute myself and you go.
Have you got the slides?
We do now. So what I'll do is I'm going to stop this presentation and I'll show you your slides. So Jane, if you're able to actually start getting into the introduction to it, I'll get those up in a second.
Fine, thank you. So thanks Andrew and Stuart, firstly for coordinating this workshop, because this is an area that us as a collective group of, well, it's a rapidly changing part of the landscape, and so it's something where it is important that it's accurate and up to date. So I just wanted to reiterate, ACLUMP stands for the Australian Collaborative Land Use and Management Program, and a key thing there is around collaboration. We operate under a collaborative MOU, and we have when Stuart brings up the slides, you'll see that there are a range of partners engaged. I mean, we are primarily a government committee, well, overseen by a government committee, the National Committee on Land Use and Management Information. The group was established in the late 1990s, and really as a recognition that we didn't have a picture of our land use nationally. In those days, spatial information was in its sort of infancy. So I think as part of these discussions that we've been having the last couple of days is to realise that the importance of having a framework, of having a value proposition and buy-in as to why we need the product, and then accepting that this is a journey that we're on. It's going to take some time. So for the Australian Collaborative Land Use and Management Program, one of the things that we do is wall-to-wall land use mapping. And what I mean by wall-to-wall is we do all land uses, so not just agriculture, those related to conservation and so on. So I suppose I wanted to iterate there that in terms of our land use at what we call the catchment scale, which is regional land use mapping with sort of a minimum mapping unit of 2 hectares, it took us until 2008 to have a national coverage. Now technology is allowing that to happen more rapidly, and so we look to release an annual update annually, but that's restricted by the capacity within the different organisations to update. So it's been commented over the last few days about the currency of the data, and so that's always a struggle that we have. But I think what's the important thing is that we have the framework and the governance in place to take that information and put it in a consistent framework to then put it out, and it's put out under a collective umbrella of ACLUMP, although the program is coordinated through the Australian Bureau of Agricultural Resource Economics and Sciences, or ABARES, within the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. It's very much a combined product and all partners are acknowledged. If we go to so I suppose just to reiterate, land use is one aspect. We do land cover and land management. So I suppose we've had that familiarity with how to set the governance, the framework, how to provide that information that protects privacy. We don't publish any individual people's names, or it's purely the location and the extent and the way. If we go to the next slide, Stuart. So in terms of our technical standards, particularly around, we have the Australian Land Use and Management Classification. So that's been a collectively agreed classification based on the level of intervention. And I think some of the comments that have come up that Andrew was showing, the classification allows that flexibility in terms of the level of detail that you might map. So we've been seeing that pretty map of Australia. That's a simplified version of the land use mapping that we do, and you can go down into the detail. I mean, I think that what we're striving for is to get to that commodity level, but the classification allows you to roll up to say, rather than if it's wheat, it's cereals, it's cropping, it's irrigated or dry land cropping. So you have that flexibility there. Yeah, I think that's probably enough from me at the moment. I just really wanted to make sure that people have an understanding of who we are, what we do. I mean, our data is publicly available. That's a requirement. But there's potential in terms of how that data is managed as to what goes into the public sphere. And we've done that in terms of when we've done our land management products. If people providing data, they don't wish it to be published, we then keep that aside. It doesn't go into the public domain, but it still informs the development of the products. I think that's enough.
Thanks, Jane. That's extremely helpful, and that flow chart's extremely helpful and relevant to what we're talking about here as well. Andrew, was there any other clarification you wanted in there?
That was the main ones that were relayed back yesterday, and so hopefully we provided some base information to support some of those misunderstandings or clarifications. If there's any other questions about that during the text boxes, please add them through, and we'll get them. We'll get to them at the discussion session.
Yeah, cool. And we do. I'm just noting comments from like Anthony Wilmot and other people. We do have a number of people offering to show examples. I think that'd be helpful, but we just want to get through one next part to help explain how things might fit together as well at the moment. So thanks again for the offers to do those, but we can just do that. So we'll be back to getting everyone's input in a second. All right. Okay. One of the key things, so this is essentially drawing together over the last couple of days what we've talked about. And just a reminder, as you can see in red, it's just draft. It's a starting point to go forward. You know, part of the reason for doing this and part of the reason for having Jane talk about ACLUM and also hearing from other groups is there are existing processes in place, and what you'll see is some commonality between them. So 2 slides here, and then we'll go over to a broader discussion. So if the end goal here is delivering a capability for national crop mapping at a high level of detail, where it's able to collect information from a range of sources, which also includes field validation data, as well as imagery, as well as existing maps, there is going to need to be some process around it and resourcing for it. So what we're discussing is there'll be if you look at the organisational structure, there's a guiding component of it, which is what you see on the slide here, and then some operating components that may pull together what people are doing. So in terms of the guiding component, It's key, obviously, that there's an advisory and steering committee there. And this is across a range of government levels. It is, and that's from local to Commonwealth. It is across industry, from multinational industry through to quite small SMEs. And these are groups that both produce this information and use it. And then we've also got groups, whether it's in universities or research institutions, that are developing applications that can be used. So the advisory steering committee would have representatives from key areas there. It wouldn't be huge. It'd be less than sort of 10 or so people. Then there's the operational level in terms of making sure there's abilities to deliver products and services, and that also includes funding for it. There's a host body. At the moment, we've tentatively suggested that it is a combined national body that has national remit, but that it's got private input into it as well. So again, this is proposed. And then governance, this needs to be set up properly in terms of, it runs according to a set of terms of reference, and it has appropriate operating protocol, in terms of its funding, its finance, and communications, and all of those things. So that's ideally what sits on top of it. The engagement with the whole community comes under the operating components. So in this diagram, we've compressed what was on the previous page, which was the top two, so the advisory committee and the operational side of it. And then there's 4 components. There's products and services, crop mapping resources, standards and procedures, privacy and resources. If you think back to the ACLUMP side, there's some similarities. If you look at other activities where people are trying to pull together different communities to help them work and do their own work, you'll see a similar structure here. So products and services, this is what is essentially being aimed for. Now, the aim is to be able to help produce or deliver a high spatial resolution national crop map at commodity levels that's in a secure space for people to access. So again, this is proposed. Below that, you've got another level, which is similar in terms of the products and services you can access, but it's suitable for public use as opposed to within industry and other activities. There is also ability to access field validation data services, and this is noting that, yes, some industry may not be willing to put those in, but it's critical for government, publicly funded activities to put that information up there, and that's something that really greatly helps with the development and validation of these things. The resources column is what goes into building, what's in the product. So it could be access to image data sets from a range of providers, field validation data sets as well. It could be access to whatever constitutes workflows, whether it's descriptions of them, whether it's algorithms or code or whatever. And then links to other areas where information can be pulled from. The third component are standards and procedures. So if this activity is pulling together data sets from an image point of view, from crop boundaries to crop classifications and putting them together, there needs to be standards for doing that. For validation as well, you would need to have something there. Licensing as well, and then also consideration of actual data formats and metadata formats to enable interoperability. And just to be clear, this isn't about telling everybody to put your data in one data type as well. So, okay. And then the last one is, because I guess data privacy in this, because of the level of detail collected, is an issue. This requires attention by itself. So those are the 4 components. Again, this is a straw person draft structure where there's, let's bring everyone together and build a capability, and then let's make sure there's appropriate governance in place as well. So what I might do is just hand over to Andrew. I'm aware that we're a little bit behind time. Andrew, do you want to add any comments into that before we keep going?
Short answer is no, that's fine. I think with the discussion to build this in the first instance, you've covered it well enough, so that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to keep my voice low.
Yeah, okay. So what we're suggesting now is we realise that's a fair bit to take in at the moment. We're just going to suggest a break for 5 minutes now and come back and go through a number of discussion points. I'll come back to that slide. And that's about clarification of anything that we've covered. But then in terms of that draft structure, given that you've only just seen it, a couple of key points to think about. We do want to flag that this is the start of a discussion. We'll release this material and also distribute it and provide a formal opportunity for people to submit comments after today online, and those will all be taken into account in terms of building the next step. So, just to be clear, today's discussion isn't about let's just present it, get feedback and go. We know you need to sit and think about this and then, think about, is it right? What else would work? What wouldn't work? So if I stop there, and then if we come back at 22 the hour for discussion points, if you've got questions or points now, just type them into the chat window and we'll go through those in turn. And again, thanks to Andy Clark, Tim Neal, and also Anthony Wilmot for putting in some material, which we'll come back to. Thanks, everyone. So what we will try and do is come up with a range of ways of running the discussion jointly. Might just get Andrew to take over the discussion for a second while I reduce some noise around here.
Thank you for the comments that have come in. Look, there was a question to present some other different platforms on here today. When we initially discussed, I'll just make sure I'm not muted. When we initially discussed the setting up of this workshop, we did discuss having everyone have all those people who provided their current activities and the current links to provide a 5-minute spiel of that. We were wary of time. We were wary of taking up everyone's time with 3 workshops, so we kept it just to the links at the moment. But they are going to be available in the report, and for those that would like to reiterate what the links are of their products, please put them up in the chat so people can look at this after this. The ones that we have shown today, very much with the ACLUMP side of it, was, as we said, as a potential host of the outcome of this. It was important to demonstrate how it currently works, how it works with privacy, governance, availability of data. So those that aren't aware of it can get a better idea of why we're probably suggesting is that may be a good host. So that's the context of why there was an ACLUMP demonstration today. So, yep, feel free to add any questions around that. I'm just looking at the questions. I haven't nodded off. Stuart, have you read some of the questions? Do you want to pick it up?
Yeah, I did. I guess I'm just going to flick back and forth between our discussion page here, just to remind us of the structure that we're going through. And we do have just over 30 minutes to run through that. Just a reminder, you can, I think, raise your hand virtually on the, I guess, the actual display there. So, you can turn on your camera, a microphone, and make a point or type something into the chat window as well. The first thing we just wanted to spend a little bit of time on is, was there anything in the workshops that we've covered so far that didn't make sense or needs clarification? And this is just acknowledging we've got a really wide range of people on here, and often we talk in acronyms and get into a lot of assumed background knowledge. So we just wanted to check if there was anything like that to cover first. And then there are some quite specific points that people have brought up, particularly around data security. I think Bron Cole's question around costs for buy-in as well, which is a really good one. But those are for a bit later on. So any sort of general points of clarification first, I think. And you can put them in the chat window, or just put your hand up as well. So, and if there's not, we'll move on to looking at that at the structure. So I'm just looking at the questions that we've had so far, just going through there. I mean, the comments that we have had, and I think, and again, I think some of the land cover mapping people already are across some of this, but for other groups, the states and territories contribute to the ACLUM program, and they all have a range of different activities going on, from really detailed land use mapping, trialing new data sets and algorithms, through to more general approaches as well. Andy Clark's comments in the chat window explain where Queensland is in that context there. But I also did want to point out that Andy's comments around sharing data sets, and particularly for validation calibration, are really important, and they do help everybody. The other point there is a transition to automated mapping of things. The example that Andrew showed before with OneSoil is a good example. You can pretty much go to any other area which is using satellite imagery, and you'll see people pushing similar global approaches. There was a paper that came out yesterday looking at essentially how do we count all the trees globally and map them, and map how they're changing over time. That's the scale that people are thinking at. The data are there to do it, the compute's there to do it. It's just, how do you do it properly? So yeah, keep that in mind as well. I do want to acknowledge Tim Neal's point about publicly funded data, publicly funded projects and data privacy and access. And obviously that's something that we do want to look at carefully here. And that's why, when you look in the structure that, that we proposed there, that there's definitely a full section considering that, even though funding guidelines for whether it's CRC or ARC or a Commonwealth or state agency do have data access clauses in them, there's a need to look at that separately and carefully as well. So
I think that was very much reiterated in that survey for the end users that came through yesterday, that data privacy was a really, really common theme. And I think that's why we've sort of focused on keeping this very preliminary layer just purely extent, what it is and where it is. The value add beyond that is yet to be examined.
All right. Okay, we might, Andrew, unless you can think of any other points of clarification that we haven't covered. Okay, so what I suggest we move into now is the 4 dot points for the open discussion are around the structure that we had presented there. And again, acknowledging that you've only just seen this, but you're all coming from different perspectives, maybe putting this in context of, does this actually look like it'll support what we're trying to do? Is it too overly complicated? What needs to be there for it to work for my agency, my activities as well, in terms of moving things forward. So
Stuart, can you put the structure back up on the screen?
Yep.
Thank you.
So what we're looking at is the structure at the moment, where there's a governance administrative component, that sits on top of it, and then you've got essentially 4 capabilities if you want under that. And again, we're definitely happy for people to talk through this. I mean, put your camera and mic on and let us know what you're thinking, or type it into the chat window. And I see we're starting to get some comments in there as well. So, right. So just looking at the comment from Matt. Yeah, and this is actually a pretty good comment. You know, Matt says that, you know, they're happy to publish a product that's a bit rough around the edges with a large error. And, you know, you have hit the key point there, which is being transparent about what it is you're showing, you know, what that error or accuracy level is and how it was actually derived. And then it's up to people to choose where they're fit for use. Just to give a quick side example of that, you know, 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the science communities in terrestrial and ocean sciences went through this, and the knee-jerk reaction was, we're not sharing our data, people will misuse it, we're not sharing our validation data, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to discount that, but that discussion's 10 plus years old. I realise there's privacy concerns with some of these things, but where those communities got to within 2 or 3 years is, as long as people could see with the data sets that they were looking at online, how it was produced, how it's been checked, they could make decisions on using it in terms of it being fit for purpose. And that was whether it was state or Commonwealth agency use. I'm sorry, I don't have any local government examples for that, but, and also in some case, industry use, particularly in the oceanographic information services that are provided through some of the satellite monitoring systems. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good point, Matt, and something to think about.
Claire's got a question there, Stuart.
Yeah,
Claire, are you able to clarify what you mean by private data? Are you talking about productivity information, grower names? What are you referring to there? If you'd like to elaborate.
Probably not at that level of private, more along the lines of crop type and yield sort of information. So the stuff that's paddock specific rather than person specific, if you can appreciate that that's two different things in my head.
Yeah, definitely the crop type is the key into feeding into this. So we'd assume, or we'd want that to be publicly available. Yield is a different story. Productivity is starting to cross into that personal information. So that wouldn't be made publicly available within this framework.
Yeah, and if you look at the model there, that under products and services, and I think you can see my mouse on the screen there, that top left version is, now that is the secure one, and there would be a certain amount of, I guess, use restrictions on that. And just to be clear, we don't know what that looks like at the moment. That's why, you know, you would have a group working on how does, you know, what does that actually look like? How do you put it together? And it's driven by people, you know, across industry and government there. And that does get to the point that Matt Miles has just made in the comment there, is that, you know, if part of the process for setting up this capability is, you know, what are the key use cases or the audiences using it in terms of how they provided data, how they're going to use it, that would actually help us decide. And, you know, the data access is going to come down to licensing and access restrictions. Just before we move on, Claire, can I get you back for a second? Your clarification, you mentioned methods as well. Can you just expand on that a bit, please?
Yeah, so it sort of speaks to the point that was raised earlier by Matt P in the chat, that the data itself is useful, but you actually kind of sometimes need to know how you get there. But that can actually be the proprietary information is the method that produces that output. So what's the expectation on having those methods being made part of the openness of this practice, or if it's people still get to hold their recipes, but just provide the outputs?
That's a really good question. Andrew, I don't think we're not pretending to know that there's one answer to that.
I think there's a generalisation sort of answer to that, is that the final product will have standards of accuracy and in general how the data was collected. I don't think it will have to divulge every partner's contribution and the methodology they have used. That would be part of establishing that governance and reporting, but definitely totally understand where you're coming from. It wouldn't be made open slather for all to copy.
Yeah, I think that's the distinction you've made there is a really important one, and we see it in other areas where there's a whole range of different ways you can produce that output, pixel value or polygon, and that can, that's definitely can be commercial in confidence, but how it was validated is something that people do want to know, and there will be different levels of that as well, in terms of, but that's what people will use to decide fitness for use as well. So, all right.
And that's really good input as part of putting this recommendations through in the following stage of this discussion. So that's fantastic. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, no, that's some really good points there. So just going on to Andy Clark's point about desired granularity. So Andy, are you talking about smallest pixel or smallest field? Maybe if you're able to hop on and clarify.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously there's the pixel size, but it's the size of the field as well, to make sure that, I guess, if you are looking at errors, and what your degree of confidence is of your projections, whether it's a classification or your boundaries, obviously if the bigger variation you have in there, the smaller holdings, particularly with an intensive horticulture where it might not be as bigger area that you're working with, you've got the potential to lose out on that rich information that comes out of that.
Andrew, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think we've seen that with carrots in particular, very small parts of a centre pivot that are rotated very quickly. So not only is the spatial resolution issue, but the temporal issue. Yeah, look, I think the short answer is we can only manage with the data sources available that are affordable to use and practical to use. So whilst ideally it'd be lovely to have 10 centimetre imagery over the whole country every 10 seconds to update this, I think it'll be a balance of what's available at the time to do it, with the best intent to get the highest accuracies for cropping systems updated every year as well. Does that answer your question, sort of, or not really?
Yeah. No, look, it does, but I think I think it's going to have to be a multifaceted approach depending on what region you're in and what sort of cropping sector that you might be focused on as well. Because obviously you have those seasonal crops, you have perennial horticulture, and then you have the winter cropping systems and things like that. So it can it's going to be a complex beast.
It is, Andy, and that's why it's awesome if you're going to be involved, because if you're updating these for those respective industries, it'd be a great opportunity to feed that information up the line.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and that diversity of approaches is one of the main reasons we're trying to push this. Ideally in a year or two, this isn't about optical systems alone. It's about imaging radar data sets, which help us deal with a whole range of other conditions. I've also just realised we've got 2 Andy Clarks on the call, so that's good to know. All right, just continuing to go down things, just noting, actually, Anthony Wilmot, the point you've made about the DAS product, So that says to all farmers. Do you mean, what's a farmer? Sorry, that might sound like a stupid question, but it's not. Is this, it's open to the public, or what do I have to do to prove I'm a farmer?
You've just got to tell us and give us a PIC number or something that a farmer will have. And so the approach we've taken is, and we've got commercial clients, the Rabobanks, IAGs of the world, but all our data we're making available to farmers at no charge.
Okay.
You can go, anyone on this call can go online now and pilot and see what it is. See what.
Okay, cool. And you provided the link to that.
I provided a link to that. We've built our cropping hub solution, so we're just closing out 2020 now. That way, we've got 2019 crop ID for all of Australia in there at the moment. It's pretty ropey, I have to tell you, due to drought in New South Wales, but the results for 2020 are rocking. So we should have that in there soon. We're just at the moment. So.
Okay, no worries. Thanks for clarifying that. Just going on to Jane Stewart's point there. Jane, could you clarify that in terms of what you've said with a staged hierarchical approach? And then you've said, well, methods are the intellectual property, which is true, and the importance is the methods documented.
Yes. So what I mean there is that if there are concerns from commercial providers about what they provide, there's levels of detail that can be provided. And that also comes back to the privacy issue as well, if there's concerns around too much detail. And I suppose that's what I was getting at in terms of the way the hierarchical structure we have for our land use. It means that if people are comfortable to provide down to commodity level, that can be accommodated. If they actually don't wish to do that, then that can be accommodated. The key thing is that you're building up such that you get the best representation for that point in time. So I suppose what I'm trying to emphasise there is some flexibility, and there's some ways in which you can approach this so that you can start to build confidence with providers of how their data is going to be used, or to build that trust, and we're still making progress.
Thanks, Jane. That was really helpful, and that does fit into how would we potentially approach this and deal with those different levels as well. Just going on to Bron Cole's point there about ground truthing and field validation. Is it required to be performed by an accredited, trained, independent provider, or can the landowner provide ground truthing? Will the results differ? Yes, they'll differ. But I think part of this is, do we look at establishing standards or protocols which can be used to collect the data and either use it for validation and or submit it to be part of this resource for other activities. I mean, this has been something which has been done in a number of other areas of satellite-based mapping around the world, where people have developed protocols, and data are only included if they meet those protocols, and that that minimises basically error and biases. It's not going to get rid of it, but it is going to reduce it. So part of this activity is about, if you look under the crop mapping standards and procedures, there is a validation procedure there. So there's going to have to be a communication, education component there, quite possibly as well. So, and that could be done at different levels. Andrew, do you want to add to that, or is that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's some really good examples where that's working well at the moment in some of these other activities that are happening in Australia. And it really does reinforce the benefit of having the industries engaged in this process as opposed to being perhaps just like a government service, for example. Having industry as a whole means that information can be appropriately included and collected.
Yeah, we're seeing that through the use of a number of standard methods which people can provide input to. It also means they get familiarity with how good or bad the products are and potentially see them get better over time. Okay, from Sebastian Wong's is a really key point there. Okay, does this run on people purchasing imagery? Does it provide imagery under a license for certain applications? I don't know the answer to that at the moment. There's a whole range of options there. States and territories all do things differently in this space, as does the Commonwealth. Again, that's also subject to licensing, I guess, controls and how you make it available to people. So I don't know if other people have thoughts on the licensing side of things. Any thoughts, Andrew, on your side? Like how, we've said there's a potential resource for people to use. We are moving towards setting up national resources and infrastructure, as are some of the states, where you can access regularly collected higher spatial resolution image data sets. But what else needs to be included?
Yeah, I think the main point is that at the state level and national level, there is data acquisition programs underway, which would hopefully serve as a good basis for a lot of this work. But again, this is that strength of getting wider groups involved. So Sebastian and Andy, you work with Continuum, and obviously Maxar imagery is what you're referring to. If it's being used and purchased for certain applications, and there would be the potential or hope that we could include that within this development as well, or at least the classification as a result of that in this product.
Yeah, that's kind of like what I was thinking about. Like, I think Australia might have some strong leverage to come up with licensing terms that are unique. So typically, like group licenses or multi-user licenses are still pretty small. Like, they're not everybody. It's like, group of 6 or whatever, and it varies from the providers as well. But potentially, if the people who need the imagery are quite small, like the groups need the imagery quite small, and then it's the maps that need to go to a wider group, then existing licenses that we have could work. So that could work, for example, under the GUI licenses. But yeah, it would really depend on what we were trying to do. Like who needs access to the imagery? Because that, like, you can't, the biggest challenge would be giving the entire public or everyone in Australia access to the imagery, right? That'd be, I don't think there are licenses that do that, like base imagery licenses. So yeah, the way to constrain the cost would be to think about how to do that, and then like who needs it, and then who needs what, who needs the maps, and then potentially negotiate with these providers, because unfortunately most of the providers are international. We don't have like an Australian high resolution provider of satellite imagery. We do of airborne, but it will be, I think that's some of the challenges, but they're not unsurmountable.
No,
and
but that's
potential.
That last point's a really key point, and it's something that's on the table at the moment across a number of national planning activities. And this is a really good example of where it would benefit Australia to have that capability. So that's something this group may potentially be able to support and push, but it might be just down the track a bit what we're doing.
I think that leads into Norman's question next. I think we...
Yeah, to Phil. Okay.
Yeah.
So just before we get to Phil's question, there are some other points there about apps for field validation. Jasmine's put in the Fulcrum app that they're using there. Maybe Craig Shepherd and others can put up some of the apps that they're using as well. So I think just to reiterate, we do try to avoid using the word ground truthing because you're always sampling as well. So that'll be a longer term crusade for us. Phil Norman's questions. This is I'm going to put this to Andrew, because this is something we've been back and forth on a fair bit in this area. And a lot of the people who are on this call sit in this space in industry and government at state, territory and national levels. Okay, Andrew, how do we actually fund this?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, you got big pockets, don't you, mate?
No.
Look, I think the first step of this was establishing, again, what was out there and what was the need for this. And I think when we collate this together, there is a lot of need to get this right. Whilst we have a lot of activities going on, there's still a lot of holes, and we can still do this better. Once that's established, the value add beyond the mapping product itself, the value add for where people, industries, it's endless the use it's going to provide. I think we get that right and demonstrate it, there will be an appetite for funding. I know federally it's difficult at the moment, and through the different existing schemes at the moment, there's, I'm not going to go too much into it, but there's comment that funding is quite tight. State level agencies are similar. So whether it's government level, it wouldn't be solely what I would think. It would be it'd have to be a contribution, I think, from a range of people. One possibility, and I don't know if I'm outreaching myself, is that the new amalgamation of the 15 RDCs under Little Proud's directive, it was mentioned by one of the RDCs as being a possible option, being that the crop classes we're looking at cover all agricultural industries and therefore relevant to all RDCs. And so therefore it's the gain out of that and the value add to all other projects run over those respective schemes should be significant. So I think that's all we can say at this stage until we build the report together after, and then see what we have, and then go from there. Sorry, it's a bit vague, Norman, but I can't say that Bill Gates has said, yep, here's some money, go and do it. Sorry.
Just to dig into that a little bit more, this is something that, assuming this progresses in a way that we do set up a collective for doing it, and that there's an administrative organisational group initially, the funding side of it, is clearly one of the main activities that has to be dealt with properly. So it's one thing recognising you need a group of people there who are going to commit serious time to doing it. Then you get into the business case that you're going to have to make. The leverage or the strength that's on the side of this group is this is about several very large scale national industries, which state and territory and Commonwealth governments and local governments do want to support. So from a government point of view, you're more likely to get funding, from a philanthropic point of view in that case. So, yeah, I think Andrew's suggestion of, the joint RDCs is one approach, but whatever comes out of this, looking at what's actually required for funding, and then how do we present that business case is a really critical component. And I do think we are in the right place, right time to do those things, but we've got to act on that as well. All right. I just wanted to go to, there's a next question from Peter Scarth. Also just noting that we're getting close to our wrap-up time. So there's an application in an area in India which used, actually Peter, do you just want to provide some brief context around that in terms of what was actually done there and the significance of that Plantix app?
Not really. It was just a paper that came out a month or so ago on remote sensing, basically with Stanford and some other agricultural groups. But just pointing out that, rather than having other apps, there are a lot of other ways of collecting data. So what they did there was use an app which is used to diagnose basically crop diseases, and involves taking a geolocated photo, and of course you've got this perfect, well, it's far from perfect, but you've got a reasonably good data set that you can then go about cleaning up and use that as a fairly large data set for calibration and validation going forward. And it didn't require, you know, additional apps for field collection of data or anything like that.
Yeah. So it's a geolocated data set that, you know, that people could use and train from.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks. All right. Oh, we'll just pop back here. All right. And then just seeing that, you know, Craig's pointed out the app, the land survey app that was used for the horticultural, national horticultural tree survey and mapping link is there as well. So, all right. So I think we are getting pretty close to summary or discussion time. I don't know if there's any other key points that we need to cover there. Again, you know, conscious that we've just put this in front of everyone and said, hey, is this going to solve everyone's problems for the next 5-10 years and build a national capability that's useful for government and industry and enable us to all use research more effectively. It does need a bit of thought. I do want to stress the point of where we're trying to get to with this is potentially a collective for working together to do this. And, you know, that would involve careful consideration of the time and resources to set it up properly and to obtain those as well. So I guess, Andrew, any other key points there, or should we?
No, that's fine, Stuart. I
summarising?
think there's a useful discussion in the time available.
Yep.
Stuart, it's Matt Miles here from South Australia. I've got
Okay.
things running around in my head that I think spawn many conversations, but I see one of the challenges, I see what's going on here is there's a bit of a, I don't know about a clash, but we're trying to find a balance between two very different business models, you know, the commercial and open data, if you like. And I guess you were mentioning just then, what we're trying to do is potentially set up a collective. And I've also heard over the last few days that we're trying to produce a product. And I'm just wondering if you could say something about, are we trying to produce a collective, foster a collective to create a product? And if so, then the product obviously needs well defining, or is it a collective to produce a range of products? Because I think the two things are, you know, a range of products means we're really bumping into those business models. A single product makes it very much easier to define how it fits with the existing business models.
Agreed. And that's it. I think pulling those two things apart is a good way to help limit the conversations here. So yes, the end goal is to produce that high resolution product, but to get there, we need a range of groups working together, and that's the aim of the collective in terms of, you know, what we're suggesting is coming out of these 3 workshops is that there are a group of people that could work together to say, you know, yes, it's useful to build this national crop mapping capability, and then here's how we would actually go about doing that. If we just go down to some more slides. So, I mean, one way of presenting this would just have been showing this box on the far left and going, this is what we're aiming for. And it's going to be used for government and public open access. However, there's a certain amount of complexity around getting to that point, which does include, like you said, there's the commercial or public side of things, the commercial or private side of things, and then the government or public side of things. And that's there from the imagery that goes in the data sets all the way through to the products. I mean, yes, we can just go, it's going to a publicly available product, but if we're actually about helping industry as well in terms of feeding into this and providing a resource they can use within their operating models, we do need a way for those two to sit together. It's challenging, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, I think we've got to look at what the status quo, again, is at the moment, that we have the national coverage with ACLAB data, which can be improved in temporal and spatial resolution. On the ground, we have a number of different groups working with different commodities, doing crop level work and doing it well. However, it's fragmented, there is overlap, and there is a number of industries that are falling through the cracks that aren't currently included. So this was an opportunity to try and meet that gap between that sort of national whole level with the different components coming together. The first instance was to, as Stuart mentioned, was to get that high resolution crop map developed, which then could be used by commercial agencies themselves and digested back into their businesses to value add. So there's a return on that as well. Beyond that, the use of that data layer, that's where there's really high risk of competing in the commercial space, and that's why we're keeping it only to that base layer first. So if we start adding to this whole national map, yields, all that sort of information, you are competing with those commercial groups in the spaces.
Yeah, okay, that's really good clarification. I wholly agree. You know, that there is a gap there, and this is a great initiative to be pursuing. I think and I speak from a state government point of view here. You know, that to me, you know, dealing with sensitive data, open data products necessarily, they kind of dumb down is not the right word, but you know, you remove the sensitivities, and so the open data that you publish is available for everyone. I struggle to see how an open data layer can then feed back and enhance a commercial business model because it is a distillation, if you like, or it's an aggregation of the detailed data that they have. So I think this is a great thing to pursue. I think there's quite a bit of a way to go here to get the language, a common language around the different types of products, the different types of business models that are at play, the way licensing, you know, comes into it. So look, you know, congrats to everybody for turning up and for you guys for organising it. I look forward to this continuing. I think that there are some challenges here, but it really sticks around that commercialisation. So.
Just one point, Matt, to respond to is a lot of the industries, the only information they have relating to their distribution of crops is either by postcode information or surveys they run each year. They don't actually have a spatial layer and clearly have a measure of the distribution and extent of their cropping area. And they don't understand the growth, or they don't currently measure accurately the growth of those industries each year. So when you say I don't question how it would go back into a commercial agency, we've demonstrated, I think each of the commercial groups here would have demonstrated how this spatial information updated regularly is used and benefits industry itself. There's a classic example at the moment with, and I mentioned the other day, the battle over Paradise Dam in the Bundaberg region. There's both sides of the government are making decisions on whether or not to rebuild the Paradise Dam. The industry, they're using an assumed measure of crop growth, tree area production in that area over the last couple of years. It's out by a factor of 5. Sorry, Stuart's just messaged me. So it's out by a factor of 5. So the industries are actually requesting this information so they can clearly state, no, our growth of these regions has been 1,500 hectares per year in this region, so therefore justifies the rebuilding of this dam. So they're using this information. So again, to challenge that, how would a commercial group use this or value added? I think because it's not there at that high granularity for all industries, we haven't really identified that potential fully yet.
Okay, that's really good. That's really useful. I think what I was thinking of was people like Sebastian and Continuum who are doing great work, you know, at that really granular level. These output products are not necessarily for them. These will be, they might enhance it in some way. But I guess again, what you're talking about there is we're talking about producers and users have different roles in this little ecosystem that we're talking about here. Different roles, different points of interaction, and I think they will require us to define those, just so that we know what we're talking about. And as Stuart says, we're all coming from different perspectives. But no, that's really useful. Thanks.
No worries, mate.
Right. So just being conscious of time, I do just want to acknowledge the question that Bron Cole asked about how this was done overseas. That's something that we will come back to with information on in terms of the, I guess, the follow-up or summary documentation that we have. So just in terms of where we're going next, I mean, this is our sort of initial consultation and discussion. We'll come back to everyone with here's what was covered in the individual workshops as well as our survey responses, and present this and some of the key comments as a way forward. I think, Andrew, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what we would be asking groups to do is indicate if you'd be willing, to be part of a collective, initially informally, so there's not a direct financial commitment, but obviously if you commit time to help, we recognise that's a financial commitment to help progress the discussion and actually set up, what this is going to be made up of potentially, and how it would potentially operate, and also how much time it'll take to do that, acknowledging it's not an overnight activity by any means as well. So just looking back at where we started, initially, I mean, our aims are to establish an understanding of, what people are doing now, where they might want to go in terms of mapping Australian cropping systems, and look at a way that we could potentially work together. It's not simple. We knew that coming into this because of the range of, I guess, different entities working here with different operating business models. But what this enabled us at least to do is get a sense of what those models are, what people are doing at the moment, and how we could potentially move forward to address those things. So we can use what we've got on the ground. We can use all of the really smart, capable people we have, working on the ground in these industries, as well as the people doing the mapping and the modelling, to make sure Australia does have this capability, and that we can produce these products and services for government and industry, and make sure that we're also not having large overseas companies come in and do that and sell sort of within here too. That might be being a bit parochial, but that's what we actually need to look at as well. So I'll close there, and just again, I do want to thank Georgia and Larissa again for setting this up. I do really want to thank everybody who's been at the 3 sessions, or 2 or 1, particularly this last one. I know it's later on a Friday afternoon and it's been a long week. So again, thanks for your really constructive comments. I look forward to working with you guys on this as well. Andrew, over to you for last words.
Friday afternoon. I think everyone wants to run away. No, again, I'll just put in the text then. Thank you very much for those who contributed over the last 3 days. At the very simplest form, the collection of information from the surveys has been really, really useful. We're not aware of that. That's been undertaken before. So in terms of enlightening what's out there and the current and potential uses from industry, it's been very beneficial. So we look forward to getting out their report over the within a month's time. Give us a bit of time to put it together and getting everyone's feedback and contribution from there. So thank you again, and have a great weekend.
Thanks everybody. Look forward to talking again soon.